Greetings from Siem Reap, Cambodia. My name is Charles McCall, and I have lived in Cambodia for 27 years. I've been involved in education and development work for almost 40 years. And I want to talk to fellow educators about a particular subject that is close to my heart, that I've tried to apply in my strategy for education and development for all of these years. And that's the concept of mastery of the subject. Mastery of the subject. The dictionary definition is, in a mastery learning classroom, teachers break their curriculum into a series of skills and instructional units. Next, students who have mastered the unit go on to do enrichment activities, while the students who did not achieve their goals are given additional opportunity to practice their skills. And so I will tell you, my experience as a parent of 4 kids that are now grown and married, 2 of them living in the United States and 2 of them living in Cambodia, is that when they were young and they began to be at school age, my wife and I had a concern about the quality of the education in the United States public school system. And so we decided for the first few years anyway, the primary years, to homeschool our kids. Now back in those days, homeschool was not popular at all, but it's become more and more popular. The reason why is because homeschoolers progress faster and have a greater knowledge of the subject, generally. And the reason why is because of this, because of focus. In the homeschooling philosophy, you don't move on to the next subject until you master the previous subject, or at least you master it by about 80% is the general rule of thumb that I would give. In a public school system, the challenge we have is there's a curriculum and there's a time limit, and you must finish the book. The teachers want to finish the book, they must. And the students want to finish the book, and therefore learning is too fast, and some students get left behind because they don't understand. That's a common problem, and it's difficult and maybe impossible to overcome in every situation. But the idea is that if we have a basic philosophy of wanting the students to master the subject at least 80% before they move on, I think it can help the quality of our educational system. That's my philosophy anyway, and that's what I try to practice as much as I can. Now, I've been in many situations where I've had no choice. We do have a curriculum. We have to teach the curriculum weekly. We have to finish the curriculum. But the problem is, as you can see on the slide, too many students in the class. There's too many students, and we have different levels of students, and some students cannot keep up with other students. That's difficult to solve. Also, as I said, the teachers are expected to complete the book. It's part of our job. It's part of the expectations of the teacher. There's a certain level of knowledge, or really, there's not even a certain level of knowledge that is expected. There's a certain number of hours that are expected to be completed to get the certificate or to complete the grade. And of course, students want to finish the book. If they feel like they're spending too much time at the same level, then it gets boring for them. But the problem is, some students, sometimes many students, they don't grasp the lesson, and they move on to the next level, and they don't have that foundation. And so they don't even understand the next level because they haven't understood the lower level. They can't understand the higher level, and so they get further and further behind. And so there's also the problem of knowledge without application. And so I teach English as one of the subjects that I teach. I teach leadership, and I teach many other subjects as well, but English is one of them, and this is most obvious in teaching English. Students want to finish the book. They want to move on from one unit to another unit, even if they don't know it. They don't do the homework. They don't apply it to their life, and so therefore they have a small amount of knowledge, but it's not being applied. And so as they get to the higher levels, they can't. If in this situation, they can't speak English because they haven't done it step by step. And so for me, so what is the solution to that? As I said, in many areas of my life, I use the 80-20 principle. And so my goal is for my students to grasp, at least if possible, 80% of the knowledge. 20% they're not going to grasp. The same way for the students. If possible, 80% of the students grasp the subject, and 20%, as I said, it's difficult and maybe impossible to solve. But my personal strategy for trying my best to ensure mastery of the subject is repetition. And repetition, whatever the subject we're teaching, if we're teaching math, or if we're teaching English, or if we're teaching literature, or history, or science, or whatever subject we're teaching, that repetition is a key. And so we present the same material, but in different ways. And so they're getting the same material, the same subject, the same lesson, but we're presenting it to them in different ways until they can grasp 80% of it. Another key regarding repetition is that whenever I teach one lesson, I almost always go back to the previous lesson and I summarize. And by the way, I bring in the students as well. I ask them to summarize, and I particularly look for the students who can do it, the students who have grasped it, and so I will ask them to share what they did, share their understanding. So really it's peer, as one student helping another student, not just the teacher. And so I will review what we've taught in the previous lesson, what we've studied in the previous lesson, and then often I will ask a student to share, and if it in Cambodia, for example, they can share in English or they can share in the Cambodian language. And so the lower level students are listening to the higher level students, and that might help them as well. But repetition, I believe, is a key. Repeat the same thing over and over again in different ways and review the previous subjects. Some books in our curriculum have this built into them, that they have it built into them, repetition. And so I teach from a particular series of English books. I teach from any, but one that I particularly like is New Interchange, because New Interchange uses this principle of repetition throughout one unit. They use the same people over and over again. They use some of the same words over and over again, and one lesson builds upon another, but it's all put together in one unit. And so for me, that's the principle of repetition. And then, of course, practical application to life. Applying this, how can they use whatever it is, if it's math, science, or history, how does this apply to their own life? And then, of course, there's a special attention to the slower students. And it's difficult for a teacher or an educator to do that, because if we have too many students, you can't spend private time with all of the slow learners. But you can some. So for this is the 80-20 principle again. Amongst the 100% of slow learners, the group of slow learners, sometimes I will try to pick out maybe 80% of them and spend a little bit extra time with them and try to bring them up. You can't do it 100%, unfortunately, but at least we can try to spend some time or provide extra resources to the slow learners so they don't get further and further behind, or at least all of them don't get left further and further behind. And so this is just throwing this out to you as something to think about, the concept of mastering the subject. And as I said, it's difficult to do in some of our situations because of the curriculum, the class size, or the educational environment. But for me, I have this as a major priority in my thinking, and I try to apply it in some way to the degree that I can apply it in almost every teaching situation. So the question I want to leave with you, where does mastery of the subject come into your teaching strategy? So in your teaching strategy, are you just teaching to get through the lessons? or are you trying to help your students to master the particular subject in that chapter or in that unit? And so thank you for your time, and I hope this has been encouraging for you. And as I said, I've lived in Cambodia at this point in time for 27 years. I've been the director, assistant director, advisor, and trainer for an NGO. And nowadays I'm advising and training many different NGOs, nonprofit organizations in Cambodia, and schools and businesses and churches. And so I am available to you for not only just language teaching, but for strategy, and so strategy planning and management and leadership development for directors and staff. And so you can contact me if you think that there's any way that I might be able to help your organization, your business, your school, or your church. Thank you. Have a great day.